Welcome back. It's Tuesday, December 20th, and hey, we're now only 5 days away from Christmas. Now I know you see the title, and I know that you know that my Tuesday shows are typically basketball coverage, but don't worry, we'll cover some of the main news that's going on in today. But today, I more so wanted to focus on something near and dear to my heart, as well as millions around the world, especially as of late. And that's the fantasy football playoffs. Shout out to you if you're still in it. This is when it gets real. This is where you win the money. This is where you win the prizes, right? If it's a championship belt or if it's money, whatever it is. But today we're going to cover some of the main news in the basketball and fantasy football world first, but then we'll get into why I think the main part of today's show is why I think that the fantasy football playoffs, in my opinion, is actually the worst time of year for fantasy players. We'll get into that a little bit later. This is your early reminder to drop a like on the stream, on the podcast, on the show, whatever you want to call it. Subscribe if you're new. And also, I have a new format for my graphics. Comment what you think about those, man. Let me know if you guys like them. If you want me to resort back to my old graphic format, excuse me, or we could stay with this one. If you don't like it, I can scrap it. If we like it, we can always improve on it, right? Let me know what you guys think about that down below. But without further ado, I've done enough talking. Welcome to the Anomaly Podcast. I'm your host, Owen Stiftar. Let's get into the news. Okay, we're going to start off, like I said, in the basketball world first. Then we'll move our way to the fantasy football / NFL side of things, right? But the first story of the day is that AD is out again. On December 16th, I believe, a couple days ago, he suffered a foot injury against the Nuggets in the first half. He's going to be out for at least a month. Um, but the good news is they did end up going on to win that game, so much needed win for the Lakers team that is currently outside of the playoff picture. It's just really unfortunate with how well he's been playing this season. I believe he's averaging around 27 points a game, 12 rebounds a game. Both of those stats he leads the Lakers in this year, and for good reason. With those stats and with how hot the Lakers have been recently, Anthony Davis is in the MVP conversation. You know, but the biggest question with AD since he's been on the Lakers really has been his health. To no one's surprise. And in his time with the Lakers, he's only played 55% of his games. And that's not good, obviously, especially for a person you're paying 30 plus million a year to. Yeah, he's a top 10 talent in the league, so his missing time for Anthony Davis goes beyond the normal player, right? Because he alone can change a game's outcome with how talented Anthony Davis is. So it's unfortunate to see that in the 3 years he's been with the Lakers, he's missed the majority of his games, right? But regardless, get well soon, Anthony Davis. Next up, we have La Tracker. Obviously, we're talking about LeBron James. As you see on the screen, he only needs 732 points to pass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or in other words, Luau Cinder, to become the all-time NBA leading scorer. At least when we talk about regular season, right? I believe LeBron already has the all-time points record when we talk about regular season and postseason. But right now, LeBron's averaging about 27 points a game, and at that rate, in the next 27 or 30 games, saying LeBron takes 2 or 3 of those games to rest some, LeBron should be closing in on the record in about 27 or 30 games, right? And if you're wondering, 27, 30 games lands him about mid-February, if I counted right, and that would mean that it would be right before the All-Star break. So perfect for LeBron. He can get the record rest going into the All-Star break. Maybe take some time after, right? But my guess would be the February 11th game against the Golden State Warriors. That's a game to highlight. That's a game to look out for because it is fitting. It is LeBron versus the Warriors. Perfect time to pass Kareem. Next up is going to be that the MVP race is heating up. as you see on your screen, you have the top 10 key MVP leaders in the NBA as of right now. I'll quickly run through them. You see Jason Tatum, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, Ja Morant, KD. From 6 to 10, you have Luka, Zion, Joel, Stephen Curry, and Anthony Davis. I know it seems early to be talking about the MVP conversation, but we are 30 games in, and in NBA standpoints, in the regular season, there's only 82 games, so uh, we're over a third into the NBA season. So I guess this is the right time to start talking about who we believe is the MVP, at least with regular season data behind us. And right now, for good reason, Jason Tatum, he clearly leads the league, or he leads the race, excuse me. And for good reason. He's been elite this season. He's really taken that step up, uh, which many of us didn't think was possible. And the Celtics are playing like the best basketball team in the league right now. Well, I believe they're the one seed in the East. They've beaten multiple teams. The only question mark with this Boston Celtics team is how they fare against the Warriors, right? Or how they fare against teams that like to move a lot. That seems to always give the Celtics trouble. But, after Jason Tatum at 1, you have Giannis and Jokic closing out the top 3. You know, those two alone make up the last 4 MVP seasons. Obviously, Giannis won 2 straight. Then the last 2 seasons, Jokic won 2 straight. So those guys have been dominant. It seems like it'll really be a two-man race for the foreseeable future. Be interesting to see how that plays out. But then you got Ja Morant and KD to close out the first 5. With Anthony Davis out now. Speaking about the number 10 spot, with Anthony Davis being out now, I wonder who the key MVP will push into the top 10. I wonder if it will be maybe LeBron James, saying he might have to take a bigger load over there in LA. Or maybe even, I'm going to throw in a homer pick, maybe Donovan Mitchell, gets his name in there for the MVP conversation. Next up, I have on this day in NBA history. This was an idea from my dad, so shout out to him. Big supporter of the show, but this was his idea, and for good reason, I brought it to the show. But on this day in NBA history, so on December 20th, throughout all of NBA history, we're going to look at the great games that we've had on this day. The biggest thing that I looked back on when I was looking at the games throughout the years was that you had tons of great individual performances, right? No like monumental regular season wins, which it makes sense because we're only in December, which would only be 30 or so games into any regular NBA season. But I picked out 5 performances to note. In 2004, Anthony. In 2004, Allen Iverson. There we go. The answer, Allen Iverson dropped 51 in a loss to Utah. In 1966, Nate Thurmond, for all my old heads out there, he had 23 points and 37 rebounds. Obviously, the numbers back then were very inflated due to the pace of play, but still a crazy game from Nate Thurmond nonetheless. In 1989, a lot of people's GOAT, Michael Jordan, he had 52 points in a loss to Orlando. That was young Michael Jordan. I assume at this time he still had hair on his head. In 1967, you had Wilt Chamberlain, who had 53 points and 38 rebounds in a win. I believe it was against the Seattle Supersonics. So Wilt went crazy. But in 2005, on the graphic on the screen, this is the biggest game to me that stuck out. In 2005, Kobe Bryant, he scored 62 points in 3 quarters against the Dallas Mavericks in a win. And in that game, in that 62 points, he single-handedly outscored the Mavericks team throughout the first 3 quarters of a basketball game. Um, Absolutely outrageous, but if there was anybody to ever achieve that feat in NBA history, it would be Kobe Bryant. Let's be real. But that another thing to note with that 62-point performance, it came a week after he dropped 81 points against the Toronto Raptors. So that was definitely prime Kobe Bryant, or if not prime Kobe Bryant, pretty close to it. Next up, we have a patriotic collapse. Uh, Obviously, if you guys don't know, um, the last week, last Sunday, the Patriots played the Oakland Raiders. Excuse me, the Patriots played the Las Vegas Raiders. It's still a habit. But the Raiders and the Patriots played, and it might have had the craziest ending to a game in NFL history. Definitely the craziest ending to a game I've ever seen, or at least the most boneheaded ending to a game I've ever seen. If you haven't seen the clip, please go look it up. Unfortunately, it is an NFL game. It is the NFL's use, so I can't show you guys the footage on camera here if you missed the play. But just go on YouTube and search up, Patriots Raiders ending. It's everywhere right now. But basically, right, the Patriots and Raiders, they were tied up at 24. There was under 30 seconds to go. The Patriots were trying one last shot at it. They had no timeouts. And on the last play of the game, they tried to do a lateral, right? So typically at the end of NFL games, teams will try and continue to throw the ball behind them and behind them to maybe open up a seam so a player could run through. And then you kind of, you continue that process, kind of like soccer. You continue passing the ball back and forth all the way down until maybe you can get to the end zone, right? It's a one in a million type chance play. Um, Never typically works, right? But the Patriots handed the ball off to the running back, and he began that lateral process. On the second lateral, Jakobi Meyers, the receiver for the Patriots, he threw the ball backwards, but way too far. And instead of his own team, he threw it to Chandler Jones, which you see on your screen, the Raiders player. And Chandler Jones took the ball to the end zone and ended up winning the game for the Raiders on the road, or it was at home, but still a crazy ending for to that game. And for a team in the Patriots that's always been known for their time management skills, always been known for their um, extreme IQ in those clutch situations. This is a mistake that no one could have saw happening. First and foremost, and it's a mistake that is an event that we will always remember forever as NFL fans, right? But the Patriots, speaking on them solely, they were 7-6 going into that game Sunday, and they did have above a 50% chance to make the playoffs. But with that loss and with that botched lateral attempt, they now have less than a 20% chance to make the playoffs. So safe to say that that botched lateral attempt may have cost them their season. Safe to say it was a tragic loss for the Patriots. Definitely an ending we'll never forget. Next up, we're going to talk about Haason Reddick. He is the first player to have 11 plus sacks or more in 3 straight seasons with 3 different teams. Whether if it was with Arizona, Carolina, or even now with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's always been extremely underrated. Uh, he's kind of on that brink where he's good enough to have these crazy seasons, but the teams don't want to pay him that allotted money that that his play has required, right? Teams don't want to play him. Excuse me. Teams don't want to pay him that long-term contract, is what I'm getting at, right? So on these 3 teams, he's been very underrated, very underpaid, first and foremost. But with his play, it just adds to the scary defense that the Eagles already have. The defensive line alone with Fletcher Cox, we know what he's done. Probably a Hall of Fame career. You have Brandon Graham, who's up there. The rookie Jordan Davis from Georgia, who's a big guy, and he's had a very underrated rookie year. It adds to how scary that defense is right now. And when we just look at the numbers side of things, Haason Reddick he's 5th in sacks in the league right now. And with how dominant that defensive line has been, he's never going to be double teamed. So they have a dominant defensive line. They have a guy that's 5th in the NFL in sacks right now. And with how dominant he's been picking his play up actually as of late. It'll be interesting to see where Haason Reddick ends up with 3 or so games left. I want to say 13 and a half. That's the number I'm going to put out there for Haason Reddick. Next up, we have Justin Fields. He is now just the 3rd quarterback in NFL history to have over 1,000 rushing yards in a single season at the quarterback position. He joins only Michael Vick and Lamar Jackson at the quarterbacks to achieve this feat. Obviously, we know Mike Vick and Lamar to be possibly the two greatest mobile quarterbacks of all time. Justin Fields, he's been truly amazing this season, though. It's without a doubt he is their franchise guy. Even though he's only 5-18 as a starter for the Chicago Bears. Um, we all know it's not the record for a quarterback is not always his fault. The quarterback can't go out there and play defense. The quarterback can't go out there and kick the field goals when the game's on the line, right? So basically, I'm saying he's without a doubt he's the franchise guy. I just hope that Matt Eberflus, the coach of the Chicago Bears, and the Bears front office, they go out there this offseason. They're going to have over $100 million in cap room, or at least that's the projected number. They need to go out there this offseason, get their guys some help, and they could be dangerous. I mean, they've competed in a lot of games this season. They just don't have enough to pull out the fourth quarters, right? Next up, we have Jonathan Taylor, who suffered a high ankle sprain Saturday versus the Vikings. He is believed to be done for the season. Oh man, this hurt. This hurt, and this may or may not. I'm not gonna say what, but this may or may not have been the sole reason for the show today, right? It was very heartbreaking news to me and many other fans around the world, especially us fantasy players. Jonathan Taylor, you never want to see him go down. In most leagues, he was the number one overall pick. And in the NFL speaking, I mean, he's a top 10 NFL running back. So you never want to see a talent like that go down. But Jonathan Taylor, I think he is set to get more opinions on his injury, either it was yesterday or this morning. Even if he were to get different opinions on his high ankle sprain, if they downgraded the injury or whatever, in my opinion, I don't believe there is another reason, or I don't believe there is a single reason Jonathan Taylor comes back this season. The Colts, they're 4-9-1. They're not technically eliminated, but they are out of playoff contention. The I don't believe there's any reason for Jonathan Taylor to come back this season, possibly re-aggravate or worsen an injury that he already does have. So, Jonathan Taylor, your team sucks. Stay home, get healthy, and we'll see you next season. Especially for our fantasy players. But it hurts, man. It hurts because I did have him on the only team I have left in my fantasy reservoir, or I guess my fantasy teams, right? What to say that. But next up, we have Matty Ice, literally. If you're unaware, the Indianapolis Colts suffered the biggest comeback in NFL history this past Sunday, which was 33 points. It was perhaps the craziest ending, or perhaps the craziest thing that happened this past week, including that botched fumble. And it was the Colts and Vikings game that I believed happened on Saturday, last Saturday, right? At halftime, I'll put it this way. At halftime, the Colts stunned the world, right? They're 4-8-1 at the time. They're facing a 10-2 team or 10-3 team. They're up 33-0 at halftime. In that 33, their offense didn't look dominant, right? But they had two defensive scores, a blocked punt. Um, obviously you had more scores along the way, but you were up 33-0 on the second seed in the AFC. It shocked the world to say the least, right? But slowly but surely, the Vikings kept pushing, they kept fighting, and they came back slowly but surely. They ended up taking the game to overtime, and they won the game. It is now the largest comeback in NFL history, and you got to feel bad for Matt Ryan, right? I mean, sure, he plays a part in that game. He is the quarterback of the Colts, but you got to feel bad for him, man. In 2017, when he was the MVP for the Atlanta Falcons, he blew the infamous 28-3 Super Bowl lead to the Patriots, and then you add on to it. So not only did he blow a Super Bowl chance, his one and only time that he's been to the Super Bowl, he blew that game. Not only that, he now has the biggest comeback in NFL history added to his resume. Um, my question now is which is worse, right? Obviously, blowing both of them was worse, but in the moment, is blowing the Super Bowl lead worse, or is it now knowing that you've now blown both of those leads, the Super Bowl lead and the 33-point lead, which is now the biggest comeback in NFL history? He now possibly has the two biggest in NFL history. Matt Ryan, you got to feel for him. The only reason I raised that question, though, is because, in my opinion, even though you have the biggest comeback in NFL history now on your resume, I believe blowing that Super Bowl lead will always be the biggest thing he regrets in his career. And I think that that's got to be worse than even knowing both of those things happened to you throughout your career. Next up, Lions, they're roaring. I'm sorry to be corny. I'm sorry to say it, but they are roaring right now. They improved to 7-7 last week. They're 500 on the season, and they're making a strong push for the playoffs in the NFC. The story of this team throughout the story of this team this season, right? It went from a cute story, just Lions, they're winning a couple games, but now that cute story is now a very real story, right? This team, they lost 29-0 to the Patriots in week 5, right? Going into their bye week. They were 1-4. They come out after that bye week and they lost to the Cowboys. So not only were they 1-4, they came out of the bye week. They lost by 2 or 3 scores, right? I think it was like 29-6 or 29-3, something crazy like that. But then, they're 1-6. Their season's pretty much over, right? That was when Dan Campbell came to the stage and pretty much knew he was going to be fired. He admitted that in his press conference after being 1-6. And hey, I mean, for good reason, right? To have the belief that at 1-6 their season would be over. Because since 1990, when the playoffs expanded to 12 teams and not 10 teams, no 1-6 team has ever made the playoffs. Crazy stat, right? But the Lions, I mean, hey, they've won 6 of their last 7 games. They got hot, and now they're 7-7 with 3 very winnable games to close out their year. Don't be surprised if they do make the playoffs. I will say they are America's team. Safe to say everybody is rooting for them for the foreseeable future. But records are made to be broken, right? And no team has ever done. No 1-6 team has ever made the playoffs. I'm hoping this Lions team is the first to do so. Uh, the only thing I'm hoping for Lions fans, though, is I hope that they are not a 10-7 team that doesn't make the playoffs, right? Because that is possible. It's possible that if they are 10-7, there's a possibility where they miss the playoffs, even if they win out. I hope that is not the case for this Lions team. But who knows, right? The last and final segment of the day, the main segment I wanted to talk about, which, shout out to me, we're only about 23 minutes into the show, is the ups and downs of fantasy football. Um, as you see the subtitle there, I'm not going to say it, but if you're watching, you could see the subtitle. Um, Regardless, I wanted to talk about today why the fantasy football playoffs suck. And as a fantasy football vet and as a player that's played for a long time, I believe the fantasy playoffs are actually the worst time of year for fantasy players. You know, but let's get back on topic. Before you say anything in the comments, before whatever, right? Let me read off my credentials. I feel like I'm reading off my resume, right? But I actually wrote down my credentials because I was curious myself. I was like, maybe I just need to be better, right? But I've been playing since 2011, since I was, I was 8 years old, or maybe going on 9. So I've been playing for about 11 years now, right? And every single year, I want to say for the last 5 or 6 years, I've dedicated 6 to 7 months every year for prep and in-season work for fantasy football. So, I usually start my draft prep, I want to say in July, June maybe. And the fantasy football season, depending on how good you are, goes until about January, right? So you're dedicating about 6 to 7 months of your life every year. And I've done that for the past 5 or 6 years, and with doing that, I've won about 55 to 60% of my games. And that's with 5 or 6 teams a year. So 5, 6 teams a year, I'm winning about 55 to 60% of my games. I've won 3 championships on Yahoo, 3 first place championships, many placements over there on Yahoo. Saying second and third places. I think I have 13 second place trophies. So let's just say I know a thing or two about getting to the title game, but not delivering. I also have 3 championships on ESPN as well. So, those the ones on ESPN are obviously friends leagues. They're not money, but I still have 6 total championships. With plenty and plenty of placements along the way. I know a thing or two about what I'm doing. I sound like the State Farm commercial. Um, or what is that commercial? I don't remember. Let me know what that jingle is because it's in my head right now and I can't uh, get it out of my head. It's I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. Anyway, let me explain to you why this season this is near and dear to my heart. Right. After that debacle of a Sunday night football game this past Sunday with the Commanders and the Giants, where the Terry McLaurin, who I had on my fantasy football team, he gets called for an illegal formation, even though he checked with the ref. And then on the fourth down, on the last play of the game, the defensive back for the Giants was hugging and even jumped on the back of a Commanders receiver. But since it was the last play of the game, the refs let them play. In my opinion, a penalty is a penalty, especially with 2 fringe playoff teams. That's a call that needs to be made, right? But now I only have one team remaining after Terry McLaurin wasn't able to get one more catch. And like I said, only one team is remaining out of my 6 teams this year. It's incredibly frustrating, for sure. That league that I had Terry McLaurin in, I ended up losing that game by 1.8 points, right? So in fantasy football terms, if you're not a fantasy player, 1.8 points could be 2 catches. It could be a catch for 8 yards. It could be a touchdown, whatever, right? I was 1.8 points away from having 2 teams left, right? Which is 2 chances at money. And with the chain of events that happened on that Sunday night, it's just incredibly frustrating. And that's another reason why the fantasy playoffs suck, because this is the time of year that every single game matters. It is win or go home, right? And for every fantasy player to put all the time and the emotion and the effort and everything else that goes into it into your team, every team that you have, right? Just for it to be gone off of one magical performance uh, on your opponent's team, right? If your opponent that week has a player that goes off for 35, right? Or if you just have a compilation of injuries on your team, right? So with it being win or go home in the fantasy playoffs, you could lose to a magical performance, you can lose to a bad call by the refs, you could lose to just a bunch of injuries to your team. And look, I understand that is included in fantasy football. That is a part of the game that we all know and love. And that can happen at any point in time in the regular season. But my point is that in the regular season, it's not always win or go home, right? You can adapt to the things that happen. You can afford a loss here and there. But in the postseason, obviously you can't, right? And the most frustrating thing to me, it has to be those magical performances. Even though the refs costed me a game, it has to be those magical performances because, you could be playing a team that isn't even fully set, or you could be playing a team that has a couple players go out to injury. But if you have a player on your opposing team that goes out and has a 30-point game or has a 35 to 40-point game, there's nothing you can really do about it, right? Excuse me. Unless you can match it with the strength on your team, but most times you can't, right? And another frustrating thing is that, you can have a better team head to toe. You could flat out be the better fantasy football player. When we look at resumes or just in-season transactions or in-season trades, whatever, you could be the flat out better fantasy football player. You can have the better roster head to toe, but with one or two magical performances, you could be out of the fantasy playoffs and out of money and out of the trophies, the championship belts, whatever, you name it, right? You could be out just like that, right? And obviously, once you're out, nothing matters. Once you're out, the great team you built, all the 6, 7 months you put into your team, they're gone, right? So I get it. You're probably saying through the mic, look, it's a game, it's supposed to be fun, and no risk, no reward, right? But let me break down that, right? I understand that without risk in the playoffs, you won't get the championships or the boatload of money that comes your way, right? I get it, but let me break this statement down. It is not just a game to yearly fantasy football players, right? Obviously, there's bigger things in life. I get it, but for this to be our favorite pastime, every single season, every single year, for you to put 6, 7 months into a fictional team of players that don't even know who you are, it is still I never want to lose, right? I'm a competitor. If you are okay with or if you're okay with losing, it's hard for me to be around you when there's money on the line, right? And with there being money on the line, I am a competitor. I want to win every single game. It doesn't matter if it's a game of cards, video games, if it's a driving test. I don't care what it is. I want to win, right? I never play anything to lose. Um, but unfortunately, there's no way to get past the unfortunate losses in the postseason, right? There's no way to avoid the magical performances that your opponent might have in the playoffs. There's no way to avoid injuries. There's no way to avoid any of the unfortunate things that could happen to you when it matters most, right? So that also is a big part. That luck is a very big part in fantasy football, especially in the postseason, right? And though I don't want to admit that, because most times I believe I have the best team in the league, I believe I'm the better fantasy football player than everyone I've come across so far. You need luck. You need your players to one, play good. You need them to be healthy, and you need to hope that your opponent doesn't have a crazy game from all of his players, right? So you need a lot of luck, but you need a lot of skill to win the fantasy football leagues, and it's just the emotional part of things, right? It's never fun to lose in fantasy football, especially when there's money on the line. But that's I'll close it there, because I probably could go on and ramble for hours on end, not even joking you, about how good my teams are and how good I've constructed my teams. To see 5 of my teams already be out, it's frustrating, right? But hey, we got one league. I got one league left where it's my biggest league. Talking about financial input, and it's also a championship belt on the line. So it's the little things for me, right? But we got 2 weeks left. 2 weeks left. I'll keep you guys updated on the show, obviously, if I'm able to pull it out. But that's going to do it for today's show. Let me know what you guys think first and foremost. Let me know what you guys think about the new graphic format. Do you like it? If you guys like it, I'll keep it. If you guys don't like it, I'll change it. I'll come up with something new. But if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say graphic format, it's just how I had the picture behind it when I was talking about the player. I had the next up, all that good stuff. Uh, Basically, just go to the beginning of the episode to see what I'm talking about with the graphic format when I'm switching from topic to topic, right? That's basically what I'm getting to. Let me know if you guys like that. But thank you all for your time today, and thank you all for listening to me, putting up with me, and thank you for supporting. I really, really appreciate it. and we're gonna get the numbers back up there, man. Like we've had a bit of a slip off when we talk about views. Not that numbers are everything, but it is a big part of it, of the motivation, right? But we're gonna get back up there, man. No doubt in my mind. But I will see you guys on Thursday with our weekly NFL coverage. At that point, we would only be 3 days away from Christmas. That will be the Christmas themed show. I'll have to think about something fun for Thursday's show. But without further ado, I'll see you guys Thursday. Until then, peace, love, and hugs. I'm out. Stay warm.